50% off. Also, your Hillary for Prison t-shirts. Get one at 50% off. When you go to that link, you will find another link to sign up to our newsletter. And if you do that, you'll get a code for additional shirts at 75% off. Those Hillary for Prison t-shirts, those are real conversation starters. Let's just call it that, conversation starters. And also, Alexa Pure Water Filters, 20% off at InfoWarsStore.com. And that's from our very smallest shower filter all the way up to the super high-quality gravity-fed Alexa Pure Pro Water Filtration System. Gets out 99.9999% of bacteria, disinfectants, volatile organic contaminants, and hormones. You'll find that at InfoWarsStore.com. All Alexa Pure water filters at 20% off. You know, they always projected this as a project of fear. That's what people were calling David Cameron's portrayal of the doom and gloom that was going to happen. And as Paul was just saying, everything that happens now for the next couple of years until they can dissolve these political bonds and they're going to try to pull them back in, everything is going to be blamed on Brexit. Everything that goes wrong, financially and otherwise, is going to be blamed on them. And when I saw this, it made me think. I want to play this little 15-second clip here from V for Vendetta. Nailed it years ago. Here's that clip.
Fear became the ultimate tool of this government.
I want everyone to remember why they need us.
I wish I wasn't afraid all the time.
People should not be afraid of their government. The government should be afraid of their people.
That's right. Fear became the ultimate tool, Paul. But a real government fears its people, not the other way around. What do you see happening at this point with the fisheries, for example, or any of these other things that could be rolled back as Britain gets its independence? I mean, it's going to take a while for the fishermen to be allowed to fish again?
Well, David Cameron, who has resigned today, I mean, it's a complete bloodbath. You know, Corbyn's probably going to have to resign as well. Mm-hmm. Next week, he's going to have to trigger Article 50, which, you know, this has never happened before that a country has left the EU. So the process is it takes 2 years afterwards to completely untangle from most of the regulations. Some of the regulations of the laws relating to free movement of people and trade barriers could take 5 years. But what's important is to keep this Brexit government, this new Brexit government that we're going to have, honest. Because they could just, you know, re-implement all of the EU's regulations anyway. They could just copy them wholesale if they get infiltrated by globalist sympathies, which is always a massive risk.
Yes.
So we need to keep those people honest. The other angle on this is, you know, this is, again, it's about reclaiming this flag. It's like in America, you've been lectured for decades and decades about how you're this evil empire. You know, we've had it for even longer, you know, where our glory days are gone. We're an old rusted colonial empire. We're useless. We're nothing anymore. And this is about, you know, reclaiming some actual sense of patriotism in being British. This is the first time that many people have experienced this in their entire lives. I mean, patriotism is just completely unknown in Britain before this. So this, again, it's a stunning rejection of the status quo. It's the dawn of a new populist uprising, but it's only the beginning of the battle, because going forward, we need to keep this post-Brexit government honest and force them to follow through on what they actually promised. That's what it's all about now.
And of course, you're going to have some help because there's all these other European countries that want to get out of it as well. So the European Union is going to start unraveling because of those kind of pressures. But they're also nothing but a confederacy of dunces. They can't control or won't control their borders. We know that's a deliberate thing. But they can't control their economies either. And so you're going to have some allies in there just from their mismanagement. Paul Joseph Watson, thank you for joining us from the UK. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk to Steve Pieczenik, and he's going to tell us why this is great news and why there is nothing to fear. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Steve Pieczenik. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this day that Britain has declared its independence through Brexit. Joining us now to talk about the implications is Dr. Steve Pieczenik, no stranger to InfoWars listeners, but let me remind you of his qualifications: an MD, a PhD in American psychiatry, former State Department official, author, publisher, critically acclaimed author, along with Tom Clancy of the paperback series. Dr. Steve Pieczenik, and you'll find him at stevepieczenik.com. Welcome, Dr. Pieczenik.
Thank you for bringing me on the show, Paul. I really wanted to come on the show just to give a little perspective from my point of view and to say to our audience, a wonderful audience, and to you and Alex, that this was coming about for quite a long time. First of all, I've been writing about this for about 20 years. In one of the Op Center series, I wrote about the devolution of the EU and the necessity for the EU to devolve into entities, not necessarily nation states. Then in my book 1 and book 2 of Steve Talks, I insisted that Brexit be the beginning of the end of the EU. Now, let me explain if I don't think anybody else has explained. The EU was created at the time when I was in France in '88 on a mission, was created between France and Germany as an attempt to stop Germany from coming into power again or allowing it to become a martial force. This was a total ethereal concept concocted by a few French socialists and sociology, none of which had any bearing on reality. What France was afraid of, and it has always been afraid of, is that France has lost wars since the time of Napoleon Bonaparte, who, by the way, was Corsican. But because of World War I and World War II, France decided that it needed to co-opt Germany into a concept called the European market. The whole aspect of it was fallacious. It had one currency. It had no military, no intelligence, no force behind it. It had France not as the central power, but Germany became the central power. And the Frankfurt Bank of Germany was actually the most powerful element in all of the EU. So for the past 10 to 15 years, as much as France would like to think that they co-opted Germany, Germany, in fact, became the dominant power, paradoxically. As a result, they lent out a lot of money and credits to Spain, Italy, and Portugal, who in turn defaulted on all their loans. So what does this mean for the Alex Jones Show and for us in general? For America, quite frankly, at the bottom line, it's extremely good what happened in EU. The reason for that is that flight capital and certain immigrants will start to come to the United States because in this world of uncertainty and disorder, the one country that maintains its political, economic, and military stability is the Republic of the United States. What, in fact, will happen to the rest of Europe is that nationalism will arise, and eventually we will see Catalonia or Barcelona break away from Spain, which is already a corrupt country, was not really a country itself. It was created by a French king who, in fact, coagulated the Basque in Valencia and Madrid and the Catalan provinces. That will break up. Part of France will overthrow probably Hollande, the president who's a socialist, because they have a major unemployment problem and they're now in riot mode. The immigration problem that came in from Syria as a result of Putin's punishment to the West for our taking down the Soviet Union has now made it more imperative for the European countries to make sure that they don't have what's called the Schengen Agreement. In other words, they will refuse to accept immigrants and they will refuse to accept other Europeans to come through their own country. From our point of view, unfortunately, as a republic, we did not anticipate this on the formal level, although some of us who wrote and were part of the Alex Jones and the Alex Jones Nation and the Infowar Nation, we could see it coming very quickly and actually insisted on it because it had a strong bearing on what we do here in America. And what do I mean? For many reasons, and we've talked about this for over 14 years, the stand down and the false flags that were created by Bush, Cheney, and eventually the Clintons were involved, and now Obama, was really part of not only taking away our guns, but more importantly, reinstituting the federal government as a major source of power over the states and the governors. I had warned the federal government repeatedly at expense to myself and others, as has Alex and as has many people at the Infowar Nation, that the federal government can no longer sustain its legitimacy if it continues to produce these false flags like Orlando, Sandy Hook, and the various other elements we were talking about. The President of the United States is not qualified to be the president. The problem is now we don't have an individual other than Trump to be able to take over the entity we call the Republic and make it viable economically. Now, why am I optimistic? Our stock markets will go down in relative terms to the European markets. But what in fact will happen is the dollar will increase in value. Gold will go up to a certain point. The euro will drop. The pound will drop. The yen will drop, all because these are stagnant economies. In the meantime, because we're based on an entrepreneurial nation, we will have a very strong dollar and a very strong capacity to now reconstitute our manufacturing base using 3D printing and all the other elements that we've developed in technology. And therefore, our markets will be overseas, but more importantly, internally. I see this as a very major revolution across the board for both America and the world. It's the end of what we would call the internationalists, the ones who wanted a unified one world nation, the Council on Foreign Relations. All that nonsense is gone. It was gone in one day.
Oh, yeah.
But the preparation for the Brexit was really about 10 to 20 years in coming. And I think in part, I know Alex would say I'm wrong, I think in part shows like Alex Jones and the other shows that were the alternative media were very important in promoting nationalism and promoting and saying, listen, we can no longer exist in an ethereal concept called the EU or even the United States of America, with presidents who are not qualified, with presidents who begin to attack our own people, kill our own people, and therefore we have to decide what we want to do at this particular point. I just wanted to add those elements in at a time when I think it's extremely propitious for us to understand we are going to do better, and now we have the ability to say to our federal government, enough is enough. And now I understand Texas is even going into a nationalist movement.
We've said we ought to have a Texit. As a matter of fact, it was about a month ago, Dr. Pachinik, that I did a video where I took Boris Johnson's 8 points. He said, here's 8 reasons why Britain would be better off outside of the EU. And so I looked at these things, like the net amount of money that was being sent from Britain into the EU. And I said, what's the net amount of money that Texas is sending to Washington and so forth? Each one of these things. And actually, we can make a much better case for us leaving Washington if they don't stand down. There was an article today on the Drudge Report saying that there are more armed bureaucrats than there are Marines in our country. That's the danger that we have. That's the true standing army of potential oppressors that we have there. And that's a very dangerous thing, I believe.
No, I agree with you. Actually, I had an armed IRS agent come to my house in the area I lived in, and I told him, you get out or you get shot, because that's not going to happen. And that was a while ago. But you hit it right on the head. The question is, do we really need the federal government at this point in time? Given the quality of people who've populated that particular area, the White House, and having worked for 5 presidents, at this point in time, I can say categorically, we don't really need the President of the United States. It's a disposable. I wrote a blog saying it's a disposable entity. Barack Obama was the ultimate or penultimate of someone who was totally unqualified, someone who came in through what we call the dark side, or the CIA and the Intelligence Bureau, along with what we call the CIA of the Catholics in Action, who brought him up through the system, and the Democrats wanted him. The reason the Democrats wanted him was that they can impose federalism and the legislation that they needed in order to obviate the strength of the governor. And I remember having a discussion with an extreme liberal congressman saying eventually the governors and the local commissioners will have far more power than Congress or the president, and he was furious. So there's no question in my mind now that these false flags that will continue and are the result of an incompetent FBI, an incompetent CIA, an incompetent Secret Service. I mean, we are wasting so much money for nothing. Every time Obama does something, it costs us millions and millions of dollars and accomplishes nothing. So now we have an opportunity to begin to build up a referendum peacefully. I have to say that peacefully because, in fact, once the will of the people is known in each state, then, in fact, we can demand our own secession because the United States of America was brought together